Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Caribbean Evaluators International Professional Development Session. Today, our session is titled Outcome Harvesting. The aim of these sessions are, of course, to educate our membership and other colleagues in the evaluation profession. Our presenter today is Kaia Ambrose. Kaia is a regular on our session. She did our last session in March, so we're very happy to have her back because, as you know, our presenters do this for gratis. So we are very happy when they can actually share their knowledge and intellect with us. Kaia is an independent evaluation consultant. Since 2001, she has worked with a diverse range of organizations in Latin America, Africa, and Asia to develop collaborative and participatory, action-centered and learning-oriented planning, monitoring, and evaluation systems. She recently held the position of Evaluation Officer at the Caribbean Development Bank for 3 years, and prior to that was CARES Canada Evaluation Advisor for 13 years. Through the development of monitoring systems, conducting evaluations, and facilitating M&E capacity building, she focuses on processes for social change based in outcome mapping and outcome harvesting principles and tools. She has managed and carried out evaluations spanning a number of different thematic areas. Kaia is one of the founding members of the Outcome Mapping Learning Community. She currently supports both Global Affairs Canada and FAO as an evaluation specialist. Kaia is based in Ottawa, Canada. So I'll now hand you over to our presenter, Kaia Ambrose. Welcome, Kaia.
Thank you so much, Nadini. And Valerie, thank you for inviting me here again. And good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Today, Nadini had asked me to talk about outcome harvesting. And this is going to be a fairly brief kind of teaser. There has been a lot of growth in the popularity of outcome harvesting. So there's actually a lot you can find on the internet and some really great videos as well that I'll share the links within the presentation, and you'll get a copy of the presentation as well. But Oxfam has done some nice video links, as well as I think it's the Peace Institute, the Danish Peace Institute has done some very nice animated videos as well that also explains outcome harvesting. So this will be a little bit more of a primer, and then you can go and explore for kind of more details on outcome harvesting. And there's also on a yearly basis kind of full week trainings on outcome harvesting as well, if you thought it was an approach and a tool that you know you'd like to get more expertise in and use in your own monitoring evaluation practice. So just to say there's a lot of opportunities around it, and as I said, it is gaining quite a lot of popularity in recent years. So with that, I will just give you 2 words on the history of outcome harvesting. Actually, show me if you can find the show of hands feature. Why don't you just give me a show of hands to let me know if you've heard of outcome harvesting before. That might be a good way to start. Whether you've heard of it or used it. Where's the show of hands button? It's, yeah, got a thumbs up from Deborah. Hi, Deborah, nice to see you online. Alicia, yeah. So a few people have, Leita, yeah, you've heard of it before. Maybe you've used it or you've used parts of it. That's great. It was developed, so it's actually, we call it sometimes a cousin or a sister approach and methodology of outcome mapping. And if you were on the last, or if you know me, you've heard of me talk about outcome mapping before as well. And outcome mapping was developed by the International Development Research Center early 2000, late kind of 1999, 2000, 2001. And from outcome mapping was born outcome harvesting a few years later, as a way to kind of dig a little bit further into the evaluation piece of outcome mapping. Outcome mapping focuses a little bit more on planning and monitoring, and outcome harvesting kind of takes it from monitoring and brings it a little bit more to evaluation. And they both hold the kind of same principles. We'll go over some of those next. So it was developed by the late Ricardo Wilson Grau, a Brazilian fellow who, this book is for purchase. He developed all this book, but as I just said, there's so many free resources now in outcome harvesting on the internet. This is kind of, this one by the Ford Foundation is still, even though it's from May 2012, it's one that people go back to again and again as well to kind of see all of the steps. So like outcome mapping, outcome harvesting shares the same principles and concepts, and it's really based on a human-centered approach and a human-centered look to development and monitoring and evaluation as well. So, we're really looking at the actors that are functioning in any given system that we're working in, whether it's a geographic region, combined with kind of like a particular thematic that our intervention might be looking at. So if I'm looking at health programming or kind of climate change adaptation in a particular region, then I want to look and see who the key players are, who the different key players are in that kind of geographic and thematic scope, and really think about what their relationships are, what's the power imbalance amongst those actors, what are their hopes and dreams for change, how do we make development and change equitable for different actors in the system. So it's really looking at those pieces of human dynamics and behaviors, and really moving forward with the belief that any sort of change that we're working towards as development professionals, whether it's social change or policy change or broader systems change, really depends on actions and relationships of those different actors, behavior of people in those situations. So that's one of kind of the key overarching principles that drives outcome harvesting. And that also is driven by the principle that we talk about contribution, and we don't talk about the attribution of a particular development intervention to a change, but we recognize that many actors, including perhaps the intervention we're evaluating or we're working on and we're doing monitoring, also contributes to that change. But ultimately, people contribute to their own well-being. So it's another argument of, putting people at the center of this human-centered development kind of philosophy. And that relationships are, as I mentioned, are very important in all of this as well. Those relationships help drive kind of ongoing and sustained change, positive change in people's lives. And their environments too, the interaction, the relationships, not only that people have with each other, but that they have with their physical and natural environment too. So that's something that outcome harvesting also kind of keeps in mind. And all of this, our outcome harvesting argues that these kind of human-centered drivers and principles of development, programming, and of monitoring and evaluation necessitates that we look at the M&E a little bit differently, and that we approach it a little bit differently as well. And that's what it tries to embody in its set of steps and tools that it provides. I think maybe some of you have seen this before. It's just a little bit of a graph that kind of explains how outcome harvesting recognizes that because we're looking at human-centered development and project planning and monitoring evaluation, it's messy, right? Often we're planning projects like this in a very linear fashion, and that's that can be quite important for especially for management to set out what we hope to contribute to. We're spending good money on different interventions, or the organizations or the donors that we're working with are spending important money on interventions, so we lay it out in a certain way. But when it comes to the actual monitoring and evaluation, we have to consider that there's a lot of things that we don't know and a lot of things that will change from the beginning of the project. So it becomes not so linear all the time, and not so clean and sequential in a linear pathway all the time. So outcome harvesting says, we got to pay attention to this messiness and figure out what these clashes are, and figure out what the pathways of change are, so that we are able to better determine if we're moving towards the vision, or if we're totally going off-piste, as we say in skiing or hiking, that we've suddenly deviated from the pathway. Are we still moving towards our destination, even though something unexpected has happened, and we want to capture that and understand it and learn from it? Or is something happening that that was unexpected, but it's really taking us off path as well? So this just gives a nice visual of kind of the accepting and working with the messiness that we're often faced with in the projects that we work on, and how can we incorporate that in our monitoring and our evaluation. And just one more important aspect of outcome harvesting is that it defines an outcome in quite a particular way, that not all results frameworks around the world or from different donors define an outcome in such a way, but that it again brings back that actor-centeredness to our monitoring and evaluation, and defines an outcome as the change in a particular actor's behavior that can be observable and that's significant as well. And part of the exercise of monitoring is to always ask, well, significant to whom? And so if we think about that actor orientation, we think about, okay, who is what's a particular outcome significant to whom? Who's that important for? As well, that has been influenced to some degree by our project or our program or intervention. So that's how outcome harvesting defines an outcome. And that influence might be minor or major. It could be a large part influencing the change that's happening with a particular actor, or it could be a minor part, and there's many other influences that are happening as well. So there's 6 steps of outcome harvesting, and these are, I want to just mention, these are kind of the very traditional 6 steps, the kind of original 6 steps that Ricardo Wilson Grau and other colleagues that have worked in outcome harvesting kind of designed as the very concrete, tangible tool. And they designed this with the perspective of evaluation. They designed outcome harvesting specifically for evaluation. So, a lot of the same kind of things could happen. You talk about your evaluation questions and your objectives of the evaluation, and which evaluation criteria you're responding to. And then when you come to your methodological section, you can use outcome harvesting to be able to respond to those questions. And I'll showcase 1 or 2 examples of evaluations that have just used outcome harvesting, but many evaluations as well complement it with other tools. It's not to say that, this is the only tool that you should be using, but it can become a particularly nice complement if you're looking for some of the more qualitative and understanding the how and why change happens as well in evaluation. Now, having said that about evaluation, I'm going to present these 6 steps, but just keep in mind as well that outcome harvesting, more and more, we're starting to see it being used for monitoring as well. And it's a slight deviation from the 6 steps because, of course, in monitoring, we've got a little bit of a different rhythm going. And it can be more internal, whereas evaluation can be more external, not always, but evaluation is kind of a point in time, whereas the monitoring and monitoring, especially with a kind of developmental evaluation lens, this can happen in a kind of rhythm and reflective kind of dynamic that outcome harvesting is quite adept to. So I'll also talk about how these 6 steps have been modified slightly or adapted for monitoring. But first, I'll give you these basics. So part of the first step is designing, very much in kind of any evaluation, who your sources are and who the information sources, whether they're primary or secondary. You got to plan it all out and all of the other kind of typical planning elements, really understanding what your evaluation questions are, and making sure you've got all of the known elements there. Then there's quite a heavy part in outcome harvesting that's documentation review. One of the assumptions here is, you're assuming that whatever initiative you're evaluating has enough evidence in secondary sources. But you're going to try and, gather what there is and really do a thorough review of that. And then there's a kind of dynamic where you're going to, with your documentation review, you're going to start engaging some of your key primary sources of data as well. So you're going to be looking at what the documentation is saying. You're going to be lifting out some conclusions, some findings from that documentation. And you're going to begin to start to complement that with interviews and secondary, workshops with the key primary sources, the key stakeholders that you've identified in your design that you want to speak with. And then from that, you're going to be doing a little bit of kind of back and forth. So you might be observing something and drawing a conclusion from some of the documentation. You might have some questions around that. You're going to start to do kind of verification and ask for complementary information with key stakeholders, those key sources. And then you might want to be looking for further documentation, other key, human sources of information to be able to say, okay, is this conclusion the right one? How can I verify it? How can I know that what I'm detecting in the review of documentation and talking to people is in fact true? And so that you might want to engage other key sources of information to be able to say, okay, I can verify it with this other documentation. I can verify it with this other person. Then you're going to do kind of an analysis and interpretation. Again, typical of what we might do in any evaluation, that phase. And then there's also a step that is around supporting the use of the findings and recommendations that you've gathered. And that could look differently in different situations. Sometimes it's about sitting down with whoever might be the most appropriate. If it's management of an intervention, for example, to really sit down and think through with them, okay, what do these recommendations mean for you? What is that going to look like in terms of implementation? And even sometimes creating a use plan together with management, together with the evaluation users to really hone in and specify what the use is going to be of the information that's coming out, and even including that as a chapter in the evaluation report.
Yes, if you had
So those are the 6 steps. And one of the kind of, when you're at, sorry, I'm just gonna go back. Kind of when you're at these 3, 4, and 5, what you're going to be doing in 3, 4, and 5 is you're going to be creating a specific narrative for those, and this is what you're going to end up with. And I really like it because it kind of packages your information and your findings, what you're finding in a really nice way, a really clear way. And this is what outcome harvesting proposes. And of course you can adapt this as you wish, but you're going to be writing up kind of like a one-pager, maybe it's 2 pages, on each of the significant kind of changes that you're seeing and each of the findings that you're seeing. You're going to be writing up what the outcome is in a very succinct way. You're going to be then talking about the significance. You're going to be pulling from your document review. You're going to be pulling from those interviews from key sources. You're going to be pulling from the substantiation, and you're going to be writing that into a narrative that talks about the significance of the change, the outcome that you've seen. So the who, what, where, and when of the change. You're going to be talking about why, the so what, why is that outcome important? And then you're also going to be talking about the contributions. So you're also pulling that from all of your interviews and all of your document review and the substantiation that you've done. And you're going to be writing a small paragraph on the contribution as well. So then and you're going to be doing this for every kind of key change that you've seen. So you could, at the end of an evaluation, have a series of these kind of, sometimes they're half a page, sometimes they're 1 page, sometimes they're a little bit more, but you're going to be having a series of all of these key significant changes that are based on your document review, your substantiation of that with interviews or with focus groups. And that's going to be the pieces that substantiate all of your analysis and your conclusions as well. So just to give you a very quick example of what each of those 3 paragraphs would look like. The outcome paragraph, the outcome description is, as I said, it's going to be very brief and succinct. You want to be able to show exactly what the change is right away. So in this case, an education team now entered their data, their annual census data, into a new DHIS system, and analyzed it and produced visuals. So okay, great. We can see where it happened, with who it was with, the district education team. We can see what it was. So a new way of collecting and analyzing census data in a particular municipality, and we can see when as well. So that's all there in a very short sentence. Then the significance explains, and again, this might have a little bit more meat to it, or it could be quite succinct as well. It talks about why that is important. So what, maybe including information on what the prior situation was, and relating it to the expected outcomes, overall outcomes or goals that the project wants to see. So the change here that we can clearly see is that data was entered manually before, and now there's a way to make it much more accessible. It's easier to enter it, and they can generate pieces of data that are useful for decision makers. And then a paragraph on contribution as well. What did this particular project provided trainings, for example, but maybe the intervention of the project brought certain people together. Maybe there was something in the context that really influenced how people got together as well. So all of that information would come in the description. So then what you come out with is this complete outcome statement for all of the changes that you're detecting and kind of lifting out from the interviews and the information that you're seeing. And you're putting it into these nice, succinct narratives. And there's many ways that you can do this as well. You can do this in an automated way online and people fill it out online, or you can do it manually. If you're visiting project sites, for example, you sit and you take these stories and you ask different people what their changes are. And so at the end, you can have this set of outcomes. These are just the change statements, but you've got a set of these things that then you look at to look for how each of those, for example, answer your evaluation questions. You look for trends, you look for outliers, and you have some of that discussion with you can do further substantiation of that with different stakeholders as well. And then that becomes the bulk, the narrative of your evaluation report. Now, I said, and just quickly, we can adapt all of that to more of a monitoring rhythm as well. And this is just one example from an education program where they're using the outcome harvest to look at outcome, we call them outcome cases. So they have a specific form that they fill out, which is, I'll show it to you, which is based on those three main components. So that description of the change, the significance, they rate the significance as well, if it's kind of an extra high significance or if it's, kind of medium. And then they talk about the contribution as well. And so this is all automated and online. So what we have at the end, this is using the suite of Google Drive tools. So this all gets channeled in, funneled into an Excel sheet. So we can see all of the changes by country, by project, by stakeholder. There's one more sheet missing here. We can see the ones that have, for example, more to do with gender equality because they've indicated as such, or those that, have a higher contribution from the program versus maybe a medium contribution. So this is just one example of how you can adapt those kind of the classic 6 steps to something that is automated and something that is a little bit more kind of shorter time frame. So again, we're using this, the projects fill this out every 6 months, for example. And then at the end, when whatever the evaluation looks like for this program, they'll have all of this data and evidence that they can then do some more verification and substantiation with. So just some reminders when you're doing outcome harvesting and when you're collecting that narrative data and when you're looking for those changes as well. It's first and foremost not about what the intervention did. It's about what has changed. And then you kind of work backwards. So that's a little bit of a different lens to put on of how we traditionally, or many programs have traditionally done evaluations and certainly monitoring as well. It's always kind of like, all right, what were the outputs? What were the activities? So we're kind of going backwards. We want to look at what the important changes were, and then, we'll put together the puzzle and see the degree to which the intervention made a contribution and who else made a contribution as well. In that particular context. It's also important to keep in mind that outcomes, we all know, take time to emerge, those kind of key changes. And at the same time, remembering that kind of pathway, not every output that we're kind of engaging in as a project will produce an outcome. So we have to we have to kind of keep very, or take our blinders off and be very observant to kind of detect other changes that are happening, and then try and see if there's a line that can be traced back to the intervention. And at the same time, keep in mind that outcomes aren't always these huge, big intended outcomes. So we often use the example of policy change. So yeah, for sure, it's great if we want a new policy and related to maternal health, in a particular region or country. But what are the important changes to get to that policy change? Those can be just as important and just as celebrated, and we can learn just as much from that kind of pathway of changes to get to the bigger change. Writing is very important for outcome harvesting, so make sure that it's clear, that it's understandable for an outsider, and that includes avoiding those kind of terms that we tend to use in development, greater awareness or community ownership or equal access. Outcome harvesting asks us to really describe what those mean. What do we mean when we say that there's been women's empowerment, for example? So remembering to write about the tangible and the observable as well. And there are other onto this last point, there are other methods, methodologies that you can use to further unpack that contribution of the intervention to a particular outcome. So I know some people have started using contribution analysis in combination with outcome harvesting as well, to kind of reinforce the evidence of the contribution of the intervention or others. Sorry, I just want to leave enough time for questions. If you do a quick Google search, this is a nice example of an evaluation report using outcome harvesting. So this was on workers' rights in the garment industry in Southeast Asia, and they used outcome harvesting throughout the evaluation. So just if you wanted to kind of see a complete example, and in the kind of final report format, if you just Google outcome harvesting evaluation care OICO, you'll get the link. It's publicly available. And then these are some of the other resources I was talking about. This is kind of the home of outcome harvesting, outcomeharvesting.net. Then again, if you just Google, you'll get the links to this, but if you just Google outcome harvesting Oxfam videos, those will come up. And the same thing, Oxfam or outcome harvesting Danish Institute for Human Rights. There's a series of videos. You'll see them all if you Google it. Short videos and animated to show you how the very how and when and who. They're very useful. So I invite you to check out those as well. And I'm just going to click on, you go to outcomemapping.ca. Can you still see my screen? Is it taking you to the outcome mapping learning community, Nadini?
I'm still seeing the screen, but
is it the PowerPoint?
It's the PowerPoint still.
Oh, okay. So if you go to outcome, I'm just going to try and share it. I'm going to try and share the website. So if you go to outcomemapping.ca, there's a training coming up in December, and that takes that will take you to that's a full week course on outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. So just as an FYI, and I feel no, there's no scholarships for that, but you'll get all the information on outcomemapping.ca. So those are a few resources to bolster any more kind of nitty gritty that you want on outcome harvesting, or to kind of explore how other people are using it as well. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that are using it now for both monitoring and evaluation. And again, maybe just as a concluding reinforcement is that I do find it a really interesting and useful approach and tool, especially in conjunction with others. So if we really want to have that qualitative piece and really understand the how change happens and get some of that kind of meaty, juicy bits of nuance that we don't necessarily get from, a quantitative survey. Outcome mapping and outcome harvesting are brilliant ways to be able to bring in that qualitative aspect. So with that, I'm very open to any conversation or questions that you might have. Maybe Nadine, are you going to facilitate the Q&A?
Yes, I certainly can.
Okay.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat in terms of questions, but participants, please feel free to just raise your hands and we'll call upon you and you can just chat directly with the presenter.
And I'm just going to put my email.
Or if you can't find a raised hand for some reason because you're using a computer that you're not familiar with, please feel free to interrupt with your audio. So we have a question from Zara. Zara, go ahead, please.
Hi, morning. Thank you for the
Hi.
presentation. So I just wanted to know, what are some of the challenges with using this approach, and how would you recommend that you overcome them?
Great, thank you. And I see that maybe Zarek, you've got a little bit of in the same vein, like what situations or scenarios would you not use outcome harvesting? I think, so one of my answers can be for both of your questions. I find in my own evaluation practice, when you don't have the support, that might be higher level support, like higher management support of these types of approaches and methodologies, ones that, want to take a systems perspective or human-centered perspective or complexity perspective, management that might have more of a linear perspective. That's definitely one challenge, to kind of convince people that even as a complement, doing some of these approaches brings more rigor to the qualitative. I think many times we're like, oh, just a few stories of change, and then we kind of have the qualitative sorted out in an evaluation or even in monitoring. But outcome harvesting brings a lot more rigor to it, because it becomes very, you've got a system around it. It's systematic, and you're doing it in a way where you're doing that substantiation, and at the same time you're listening to different voices as well, or it has the potential to listen to different voices. So I think some people don't see the value in that, or you've got to convince them of that. So that's definitely one challenge. And, I've pitched it in some evaluations where, and this is where one of the scenarios where it's maybe not favorable, when the client just didn't see the value of it. So yeah, but I think you have to think about how much you want to fight for it, and balance it between your own personal, what you think is good and is going to give you really robust and useful information, versus balancing that with the client's expectations and needs as well. Of course, with anything that becomes a little bit more participatory, in the sense that you're going to spend time talking to people and going back to them and substantiating things, not that it's not just for outcome harvesting, as I said, but you've got to plan well, and you've got to make sure you've got the time the resources to do it, for sure. This isn't a rapid assessment or, a quick survey, or even just a document review. So you've got to really be careful about considering time. And I think especially if you want to gather different voices as well, and really understand how change happens from different perspectives, then that's going to add to your time and your bill as well. So to have that in mind as well, and make sure you're being realistic with your scope of work. I guess in terms of thematics, Zarak as well. I don't know if that's what you meant, but yeah, I mean, if there's a social component, for example, to an infrastructure project, which, before we used to say like, oh yeah, these kind of qualitative methods maybe not, as useful for projects that, the example is always like building a bridge. But with, I think, the increasing need and popularity as well of safeguarding, like some of the principles of outcome harvesting can even be very rich and useful for I'd say infrastructure projects that need to be able to consider the social component too. So yeah, I would really think about you have to say what's the most useful tool for the job in any evaluation, depending on what the user needs are and what the information needs are. So a good way to kind of filter that is to think through, okay, what's going to tell us the complete story? And if that's not needed, then, maybe don't use outcome harvesting. But if that's something that the client is really interested in, or your own project is really interested in, then, see how you can at least take pieces of it and start it. Ananda Consulting.
Kaia, we
Hello.
have another.
Hi. Yes, this is Veronic. Hello. Hi. I was wondering, because I think I heard you mention, I wasn't sure if it was about M&E in general, or you were talking about outcome harvesting specifically, saying that it's just becoming more and more popular. So I was wondering what thematic areas or maybe sector areas, because M&E could go across any area really, that you're seeing that is most useful in, or maybe right now most popular, or if you would recommend like which thematic areas that you definitely should use it, or it will be most useful.
Yeah, and I might try and respond to Lois's question too in the chat that might have something a little bit related to, is it a buzzword that, is just responding to everything, everyone's grabbing onto it. I mean, again, definitely for projects that are interested in social change, right? And if they've got that perspective on social change and interested in seeing how change happens, and they're interested in looking at that change and understanding change from different perspectives as well. I think if, a project is, has that it was set up like that, and it has that view. So you might think, a kind of women's empowerment, women's economic empowerment projects, for example, or, smallholder farmer programming, or projects that work with fisher folk, but also not just necessarily at the community level, but outcome harvesting has been used quite a bit for policy change programming as well. So projects that look specifically at policy influence and advocacy to, in part because that can be such a long process, right? Definitely not linear, like definitely not that nice, step change process, but so many different influencers and challengers and blockers involved that, outcome harvesting can help us pluck out, okay, where are the important pieces of change that are happening, even though that they're pieces of the puzzle, but then when we put all the pieces of the puzzle together, yeah, okay, we're on the right path towards maybe some broader policy change. So it's been used a lot for those types of projects as well. Again, I'd say that I've seen, the question's a little bit easier to answer when I talk about outcome mapping, because that is a lot more kind of grassroots participatory. I mean, it's been used in all sorts of projects, but the tendency to use it is there. Whereas outcome harvesting, like I've really seen it used in a lot of different sizes of programs, global, multi-country, billions of dollars, UN projects, or, global education projects, like a lot of different kinds of donors and a lot of different scopes of projects as well. I think it's one, and this maybe answers your question a bit too, Lois, that it's hard when something becomes a bit buzzy and popular, because then you're like, oh, well, you're just using it because it's there. And, there is the risk of that for sure. But I think still, even if a terms of reference is asking for it, still what we're seeing is the people who are responding to it know what they're doing, and they're well versed in how to insert it well within a particular terms of reference. And I think always making sure, you go back to the evaluation question, you go back to the users and the use that they want from the evaluation, and you ask, is this going to respond to what you want to know? And a good evaluation consultant will ask that as well. Is this going, you're asking for outcome harvesting, these are your evaluation questions, let's think through this. Is this going to respond to what you know, or do you need to complement with some other tools as well? Just final thing before I move to the next question, have not seen outcome harvesting yet used, I don't think, like in conjunction with randomized control trials. So if anyone knows of, I don't know if you could use it with something that's in that kind of design, but you'd have to think through that. Haven't seen it yet. So something with a quasi-experimental design, I think you'd have to think carefully about how to use it. Next question. Sure.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is about the timeliness and how and designing the harvest. So one, is the harvest designed in a participatory way? Does it include the commissioners of the evaluation really, sitting down with you to figure out how and what will be harvested? And also, whether you've encountered where an organization is requesting that method, but the harvest isn't that right, and how you would approach, the lack of readiness for harvesting.
So I got the first part of the question. I just missed a bit the last part. So if if it wasn't right for the evaluation, or for
right. So I'm just using the harvesting metaphor. So I'm saying if an organization wants to use that method, but it really wasn't right for harvesting.
Got it.
How you'd approach that?
Yeah. I think in part you would, that your answer to your first question would help a little bit, the answer to the second question as well. So in designing the harvest, normally, you really want to spend some time sitting down with the whether it's your own project team, your own organization, or if it's for a client as well. As I said before, really making sure that, first of all, outcome harvesting is going to, knowing that it's, it's course, anything qualitative can be quantified as well, but making sure that that is what indeed they want to know about, and kind of picking apart the evaluation questions, looking through sources as well. Like, do you have enough of that documentation that we're going to be able to lift out key changes from, and really be able to note key changes? Are we going to have access to key sources, human sources, right, to do interviews? Are we going to have access to enough variation and diversity of voices if it's important that the evaluation user wants to know those different perspectives as well? So in the design, and sitting down and kind of like making sure that all those ducks are going to be in a row, and that you've got access to the right stuff, I think is going to be it is that very much a dialogue, and B, I think you'd be able to determine, well, if it's ripe enough for the harvest. Now, if it isn't, if an organization said, yeah, I really want to have an evaluation, and you don't think that, either change hasn't happened enough yet, or the right sources aren't there, or there's not enough documentation, why not propose a little bit of an adjustment to the methodology? Why not propose, a more outcome harvesting light, we could say. And you can think about how to play around with it that way as well. You're not deviating from the principles of outcome harvesting. You're not deviating from the key concepts. Maybe you don't even deviate that much from the steps. You're still going to keep the core 3 paragraphs that I showed you, but you just think about how to do it in a lighter way to start off with. That would be my suggestion. Alicia?
I think I saw the microphone for Noya. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing her name correct. Open. So if you have a question, you can go ahead, please, followed by Alicia. Alicia, sorry. Alicia, go ahead, please, because...
Okay, thank you, Nadine. Hi, Kaia. Thank you for the presentation. For me, I just wanted to clarify with regard to from not the evaluation process, but the monitoring process. How do we integrate now outcome harvesting from an internal perspective then, so that the process lends itself to outcome harvesting at the from the period over time now at the outcome stage, in terms of the external evaluation? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I could probably do a whole separate presentation on outcome harvesting for monitoring, because so the experiences I have with it are with global project, like multi-country projects, people all over the world, and seated in different spots, and a lot of them as well. So there's a real process, there's some things that you really have to consider. You're depending on those projects to do the inputting. So there's a certain amount of training and coaching. So not just training, but coaching as well, so that you're getting the right details and information into your system. So there's an element of that. You want someone who can be not just an initial training, but serve as a kind of a help desk if people need help. And there's a certain bit of motivation that you have to support as well. So that's one piece. And then also making sure, and I work with a colleague on this, because the IT part is not my not my area of expertise. So he comes in and does sets up the Drive suite of tools. So the forms and the Excel sheet. So you want to have someone who can set all that up and troubleshoot it as well. So, and, then there's privacy and security stuff that, each organization will have to respond to as well. So that's like a whole other portion just to, you know, keep in mind. It can still be fairly simple, but you just want to make sure you've got the right capacities and resources in the right spot. And then someone who's going to be looking maybe on an annual basis, maybe on a semi-annual basis at all the information that's coming in. And you use that for internal learning, you use that for communication, like it's quite useful, that monitoring information. You see, like, you know, how far are we on our pathway towards these or contributing to these overall, you know, program goals or even maybe organizational goals. And then if you process it and you've got kind of like not a big report, but what we do is like a small kind of annual report. Then when the evaluation comes in, they're already kind of like a few steps ahead in the, you know, in some of the data collection process. So they can grab those outcomes that have been harvested, and they can almost in a way go right to the substantiation step and begin kind of that verification, substantiation, and start cleaning it a bit. At the monitoring, what we do is kind of put everything in there, like not everything, but like, you know, at that stage more is better. And then we get to evaluation, then we start kind of cleaning it up and picking it through and seeing which pieces are really kind of the outcomes that speak the story of change that we've been supporting. So that's just my experience with it. I hope that helps. And then, sorry, I'm just looking at the question in the chat. Yeah, I think the comment in the chat, the online piece of it, you know, especially in this, you know, this day and age that we've all gotten a little bit more used to working online. We've had a lot of success with it. So people are at least used to the technology. Where the challenge is that, of course, we might not be hearing all of the voices that we want to hear if it's only online. So I think complementing it with, you know, if an evaluation does do, you know, some face-to-face exercises and brings in other stakeholders that, you know, you can hear the stories from them, from the horse's mouth, then that can be part of the validation process as well. Okay, back to you, Nadini.
Thank you very much, Kaia, for a very informative presentation. I don't see any other questions in the chat or no hands raised, so we're going to conclude the session. I'd like to thank our audience for joining us. We know that you are all busy and everyone had to make a sacrifice to be here. And Kaia, we thank you sincerely for taking time out of your busy schedule to share with us again and impart knowledge that can certainly help us in our careers as evaluators. So have a great day, everyone. And please keep tuned for our next session. Not quite sure when it's going to be scheduled for us yet and what it's going to be on. But of course, we'll send you that flyer so you can know when our next session is going to be held and what the topic will be. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see some familiar names as well.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.